You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark with our host, Gary Anderson.
Well, we have one of the very few godfathers left on UFO ufology here tonight. We have Bruce Maccabee, and we're talking about his book, the FBI CIA UFO Connection, and he is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to UFOs and stuff like that. We touched last time you were on the show. I don't feel that we have been able to re-engineer UFOs that supposedly have been, captured or found or crashed. I just don't think we have the technology to do it. What's your feeling on that, Bruce?
Well, I have long felt that we don't have a clue as to what's going on. Some people get into this subject and do all sorts of theorizing as to how they do propulsion and how they can appear and disappear and all that sort of stuff. I've just assigned myself the job of trying to find inexplicable cases that everybody will agree can't be explained by anything that we know about. Let other people do the theorizing. But anyway, as far as the information in the book we were talking about, the FBI CIA UFO Connection, that's, as I said, that's basically a history. But it's a history written with a point of view, shall we say, that there are cases that can't be explained, and the Air Force knew about it way back in 1947 when this all began. We're starting another UFO year, and by the 24th of June, we'll be up to the day of the 73rd anniversary of the sighting by Kenneth Arnold, which sort of started this all off. I like to mention that because I wrote the only book that's devoted to that one case, and it's gotten high marks for its clarity and presentation.
Will you just tell a little bit about the book and about the case? What year was it? Where did it happen at? And a little bit about it, because there's people out there that probably don't even know what we're talking about.
Well, probably everybody's heard of Roswell, the supposed crash at Roswell in July of 1947. But before Roswell, there was Kenneth Arnold. And it's Kenneth Arnold's sighting that led to the use of the term flying saucer, and the use of that term in news stories. Kenneth Arnold was a businessman who lived in the state of Idaho, and he was flying his plane around the mountains of the Cascade Range in northern the state of Washington, and he used his airplane to get him around from one business job to another, selling fire control equipment. And on this one very nice sunny day, 24th of June of 1947, he was flying in his airplane, and there are details that I'm sort of leaving out to shorten the presentation, but it's all in this book that I wrote. He happened to be in a position to see 9 semicircular, shiny things, disc-like craft. He decided they were. He thought it must be some new development of the Air Force. When he saw these things flying southward, he was southwest of Mount Rainier in Washington, and he first saw these things, noticed them because of a flash of light on his airplane from these objects. It must have been 50 to 100 miles away at the time, probably about 50 miles away. And they flashed brightly enough, sun reflection, or maybe they generated their own light, like a laser beam. It was bright enough so that it attracted his attention, even though the airplane itself was in full sunlight. So anyway, he happens to notice this flash and then a series of other flashes coming from his left-hand side as he's heading east, southwest of Mount Rainier. He's heading east at about 100 and some miles an hour, and he sees these disc-like things flipping and flashing in the wind, as he says, flipping and flashing as they travel along, heading southward, past Mount Rainier. South of that, he was able to track them because of the flashing, the flashes, all the way down to Mount Adams, 50 miles south. And he was astounded that he couldn't see anything on these craft that made any sense to him. Circular shape with a convex tail on the rear end, and then he couldn't see any wings, and he couldn't see any engines, couldn't see any stabilizer or the type of thing you would expect to see on an ordinary airplane. Those things weren't there. So he thought there must be some new development of the Air Force, and he thought, I wonder how fast they're going. He could see they were going pretty fast, but he didn't know exactly how fast until he decided if they keep going south past Mount Adams down south, 50 miles south, Mount Adams, he says if they go past Mount Rainier and continue down to Mount Adams, I could time them, because from his altitude of 9,500 feet, he could see the tops of all these mountains in the Cascade Range. And so when one of them went past the edge of Mount Rainier, he looked at the clock on his dashboard and saw that it was reading some particular time, about 3 p.m., and had a second hand so he could watch that. And then he turned his plane to head south. These things were heading southwards, by the way. He turned his plane to head south parallel to their track to make sure, and rolled down his window to make sure he wasn't seeing any reflection of sunlight in something in his own airplane. He also had noted previously that there was a C-6 or some type of civilian transport plane traveling northward back to his rear, and north of him was back to his back to his rear and north, looking out the left-hand side of the airplane. Anyway, he compared the size of that plane with the size of the object as they were going past Mount Rainier, and managed to get an angular size, which I was used then to get an estimate of the actual size. And he followed them as they traveled southward past Mount Adams, and he looked at his clock, and 102 seconds had gone by. That's all, just 102 seconds. When you calculate the speed that corresponds to 50 miles at 102 seconds approximately, is about 1,700 miles an hour. Now, at that time, nobody had broken the sound barrier yet. Chuck Yeager, the first guy with the right stuff, broke the sound barrier, or exceeded it, in September, I think, of 1947. And that was about 700 miles an hour. So these things were already going 1,000 miles an hour faster than our fastest jet.
That's scary right there.
Anyway, he couldn't imagine what these things were, but he had no doubt that he had seen them. He hadn't been drinking, or he wasn't sleepy. It was the middle of the day and all that. So when he landed, he told some of his buddies at the airport in Yakima, Washington, and then he flew westward to go to Pendleton, Oregon, to do some business. His story of seeing these semicircular, strange craft going along at high speed had preceded him. I guess his buddies at Yakima, Washington, had called up some other people, and he very quickly realized he was being interrogated by a number of people about these things. And being a patriotic American, he thought, could this possibly be something of Russian origin? And he said, I better report it. He said he went to the FBI office to report, but there wasn't anybody there. Nevertheless, he was interviewed the next day by a newspaper company, and then a radio interview. In this book, which I call 3 Minutes in June, 3 minutes was the duration of the sighting. 3 minutes in June, the UFO sighting that changed the world. So in 3 minutes in June, I have presented Arnold's story of what happened the day after his radio program, transcribed the day after the event, or 2 days after the event. A document, a letter he wrote to the Air Force describing the whole thing, and then 2 more versions. This is a total of four different recitations of these events, and they're all self-consistent. So it's quite a good sighting. It doesn't get the publicity it should. As soon as his sighting was published in the newspapers, other people started coming forward and saying they had seen things in the sky too. And that was the beginning of the 1947 flap, of which Roswell was one part. And although Roswell has taken on a big, everybody knows about Roswell now, for the first 30 years of sightings, all the way from June of 1947 to 1979, Roswell wasn't known. It was assumed it had been explained as a weather balloon, and nobody paid any attention to it. It had no impact on UFO sightings all the way from 1947 up until 1979.
Well,
but anyway, that's the story. That's the story of Kenneth Arnold and how this whole thing got started. Then was when the news people trying to write a story about. There were numerous news people who contacted Kenneth Arnold and wrote stories based on their interviews, and some they call flying like saucers, the way he described it, like a saucer. If you tossed a saucer or a disc and it made it skipping all along the water, very abrupt motions, bouncing off the water from one place to another, changing directions and so on. That was the way he described it, and somebody took his words and twisted them into flying saucers as if these were saucer-shaped objects that were flying. That was only an approximation to what it looked like. And that's how this whole thing started. And July, 2 weeks later, was the Roswell case, which made big news on one evening, and was stomped on the next morning by General Ramey, who claimed it was a weather balloon, and nobody paid any attention to Roswell after that for 30 years.
Yeah, that was pretty. I can tell you this: the military is very good at covering